Okay, so we're going to look at four poems that deal with the same idea uh, of reverie or nostalgia or looking back on the past through the same objects. All right, in other words, a poet takes an object and uses it as his instrument or vehicle to present his presentation, whatever it might be. And in each of these four cases, he is reminiscing, or it's a poem of wonderment, and he's musing on the past. This is a normal. This is a common theme that poets use. Thomas Gray, for instance, in his elegy written in a country churchyard, he goes into the churchyard after dusk, and he walks around, and he talks about the inhabitants lying beneath the surface in that graveyard. Well, that kind of thing happens here. And the four poets are first Thomas Hardy, and he does it in a poem entitled "The Self-Unseeing." And then the second is actually a song. It's a poem, but it's more well known as a song entitled "The Old House" by an Irish writer, Lady Grey Carolyn. And the third is by Alfred Lord Tennyson, entitled "The Deserted House." And the last is by Edward Arlington Robinson, and the poem is entitled "The House on the Hill," which is a different style of poem that we haven't looked at before. It's called a villanelle, a French style of poem. But we'll get to each of those. So I'll read the first with a little preface. Years ago, I lived in a kind of a rustic, rural area of my state, and a lot of trees and forests and uninhabited areas. And there was one street that I recall I used to walk down, and on the side of the road there was a foundation in a crumbling state, and it showed that one time there was a house there, and there was a gentleman who lived in the neighborhood who told me that when he was a child, he was in his 80s, late 80s, and he told me that when he was a child, there actually was a house there that he used to visit as a child. But now all that remained were just a foundation. And many, many years ago, I went to Ireland, and I visited where my mother was born in an area called Probagh, Probagh, and that was in Ballinamore, County Leitrim in Ireland. And right now it was a forest area. The forestry took that area over and planted trees. And all that remained of my mother's home was the same, just a foundation. So that's what we're looking at here in each of the four poems. And he muses on the inhabitants. Okay, so the first poem, entitled "The Self-Unseeing" by Thomas Hardy, The Return of the Native, he wrote that poem, that novel, and a few other, The Man He Killed, and so on. This is a poem that's written in three, let's see, one, two, three, the quatrains, okay? So the three quatrains, and each quatrain does something different, okay? That quatrain is 4 lines. So let's read through the poem, and then I'll go through an analysis. So he's an observer looking at what was left of the home. Here is an ancient floor, foot-worn and hollowed and thin. Here was the former door where the dead feet walked in. She sat here in her chair, smiling into the fire. He who played stood there, bowing it higher and higher. Childlike, I danced in a dream. Blessings emblazed the day. Everything glowed with a gleam, yet we were looking away. Okay, so I was wrong. They're tercets. Okay, there's 4 tercets. That means 3 lines. So let's read it again. Here is the ancient floor, foot-worn and hollow and thin. Here was the former door where the dead feet walked in. She sat here in a chair, smiling into the fire. He who played stood there, bowing it higher and higher. Childlike, I danced in a dream. Blessings emblazed that day. Everything glowed with a gleam, yet we were looking away. Okay, so the most important line in this entire poem is the last. I'd almost like to separate it from the rest of the poem, because that's the theme. And it is a narrative. It's almost like, the rhyme of the ancient mariner, somebody telling a story to us as a narrator, all right? As the wedding guest enters the wedding feast, we're being told by an ancient person. So here it's the poet, Thomas Hardy, who's talking about, he presents himself as the child, all right, in the poem. The voice of the poet is a child. And he is talking about his parents and long ago, far away in this particular poem. And so we get back to the last line, yet we were looking away. What is he saying there? All right, we, each of the 3 participants in the poem, all right, his mother, his father, and he. So he paints a picture of, a quaint little house, the fire burning, the mother sitting in a rocking chair, gazing into the hearth, and her husband, the father of the boy, playing a violin, bowing. That's why I say bowing, not bowing, okay? Higher and higher, the tune, all right? Almost like keeping time with the flame, dancing in the fireplace. And the child in a dream is dancing with the sound of the music. And blessings emblazed that day. So I like the word emblazed because it unifies the poem in 3 ways. 1, the flames of the fire. 2, it brightens, the interior of the home, and there's a warmth there, emblazed that day, and made it indelible on the child's memory. Everything glowed with a gleam, okay? There was a brilliance to the scene in the child's memory, if you could only bring it back and go back there again, because it was warm, it was secure, and it was homely, all right? So that's the, and I like the, his diction here, ancient, all right? The old, the former door, where the dead feet walk in. All right, so that's gone because it's probably hollowed out now. Just the hollow remnants of what used to be. And he brings us back, describing his mother sitting in the chair, smiling into the fire. Okay, so that certainly captures a warmth. And the father playing music, and he, childlike, dancing in a dream. And everything is emblazed with warmth and security. Everything glowed with a gleam. Okay, you see the alliteration here too. And yet we were looking away. Still haven't talked about that last line. And I'll work it out in the analysis, okay? It's a beautiful little poem in which the poet captures the recollection of a childhood memory. Hardy uses a soft touch of nostalgia in describing the people who inhabited his home, now empty and still. The poem is reminiscent of another poem we're going to look at called The House on the Hill, in which that poet tells us, the reader, they have all gone away, there's nothing more to say. Here, presumably, the father is playing the violin while the mother sits in the chair gazing into the hearth, and the young poet is presented as a child. The flames of the fire, dancing to the tune of the fiddle playing, seem to imbue the scene with a soft afterglow. Everything glowed with a gleam. Hardy's mood is wistful. He evokes this memory to capture the innocence of the people he describes. If you read the play Our Town, I often go back to that poem because it captures this same idea. Much like in that final scene of Our Town, when Emily Webb, who dies early in her marriage, in childbirth, goes to the next world, and she realizes she can go back, and she goes back for a day that she chooses, and then she can't handle it because it's just too overwhelming for her. So she asks the stage manager in that play if people really appreciate how wonderful life is while they live it, because, watching it now as a dead person, reliving that scene from her childhood that she chose that day, he says to her, saints and poets, maybe, they do some. So Hardy presents a scene in which the movement was pristine. Blessings emblazoned the day, everything glowed with a gleam. And like Emily innocently caught up in the moment, he and his parents did not see how wonderful it all was. And what did he say? He says they were looking away. In other words, that suggests they were not appreciating how wonderful this was, okay, until it's lost, it's gone. He tells the reader in the last line, we were looking away. The line ought to evoke a sense of regret, okay? Yet it does not, because Hardy has created a tone of resignation and quiet acceptance of the loss of those childhood memories as a normal part of life's journey. The closing line carries the same emotion as every other line in the poem, a simple statement. It's a conclusion like that of Arlington Robinson's, they've all gone away, there's nothing more to say, as you see in that poem. Structurally, the poem has great unity, and I touched on this already. The narrator invites the reader into his world in the first line, almost as though we are a guest on a tour of his old homestead. With just a few details, he succeeds in painting a picture of what his home looks like now and how it appeared in the days of his childhood. The carefully chosen words, ancient floor, foot-worn and hollowed, and then suggest the passage of years and the day-to-day living of the inhabitants. They walk out the threshold, walking back and forth, in and out of the house. The dead feet walked in is extremely effective, for it not only establishes the viewpoint of the poem, but it suggests the hustle and bustle of life passing through that doorway so many years back. Then the poet focuses on his main three characters, describing a brief scene that seems ordinary enough, yet it takes on an overtone of great significance because it is now gone. It can never be retrieved except through memory. Then the line which carries the greatest impact closes the poem and leaves the reader to ponder on its significance. We were looking away, and how often are we looking away? So let's go back, read it through, and I'll move on to the next poem. The self-unseeing. Here is the ancient floor, foot-worn and hollowed and thin. Here was the former door where the dead feet walked in. She sat here in her chair, smiling into the fire. He who played stood there, bowing it higher and higher. Childlike, I danced in a dream. Blessings emblazed the day. Everything glowed with a gleam. yet we were looking away. Okay, so the next poem is by the Irish writer, and it was a song, and these are the words of the song, actually. Lonely I wander through scenes of my childhood. They call back to memory those happy days of yore. Gone are the old folk. The house stands deserted. No light in the window, no welcome at the door. Here's where the children played games on the heather. Here's where they sailed their wee boats on the burn. Where are they now? Some are dead, some have wandered. No more to their home shall those children return. Lonely's the house now, and lonely the moorland. The children are scattered, the folk are all gone. Why stand I here like a ghost in a shadow? It's time I was moving. 'Tis time I passed on. So, in the last line, he's captured by the memory, and he's musing on it. The next one is similar to the first one, actually, The Deserted House, and I'll read it through. Life and thought have gone away, side by side, leaving door and windows wide. Careless tenants they. All within is dark as night. In the window is no light, and no murmur at the door, so frequent on its hinge before. Close the door, the shutters close, or through the windows we shall see the nakedness and the vacancy of the dark deserted house. Gone away, no more mirth is here or merrymaking sound. The house was builded on the earth, and shall fall again to the ground. Come away, for life and thought here no longer dwell, but in a city glorious, a great and distant city, have bought a mansion incorruptible. Okay, so the last line of that is something like the last line of the first poem, giving us to think about it in the sense that, what is this distant city? And of course, he's referring to heaven and the mansion, when Jesus said, I am going to prepare a mansion for each of you. All right, so incorruptible, immortal, eternal, okay? So, I missed a line. Would that they could have stayed with us. All right, so that it's an afterthought on the part of the writer saying, I just wish that they had not left. Yes, they've gone to their reward, but we missed them dearly. I wish, would means, I wish that they could have stayed with us. But again, matter of fact, that's the way things are in life. All right, so I put the two poems together for my analysis. The self-unseeing in the old house, in the deserted house, developed the theme of remembrance of things past and gone forever, and the equally poignant theme of mortality and life's mutability. In each of these selections, the poet uses an abandoned structure, emptied of its soul, with the remains of its material structure, evoking remembrances of its past life. The speaker in each selection is addressing the reader almost as though he were on a tour of the area, and the poet a guide informing us about the past history of each of the abandoned homes. Although each poet uses the same technique of development, a description of an abandoned structure, each poet's voice differs slightly. Robinson's poem is more abstract. He speaks of ruin and decay in his house on the hill. He tells us directly that there is no one there today to speak them well or ill. The closest he comes to using concrete imagery is in his words, broken walls in gray, and perhaps the phrase sunken sill. Actually, you haven't read that poem yet, which follows. Overall, it's a form of the poem called a villanelle that produces its mood of sadness and melancholy. The alternating lines, this isn't the poem that we're going to read now, okay? They are all gone away, there's nothing more to say, are the dominant images in that poem. okay? Not the details. All right, so we'll get to that in a second. The Deserted House by Tennyson does not carry the same tone of voice as that found in The House on the Hill. This poet seems to be more objective in his description and does not reveal his feelings about what he describes. In the first stanza, for example, he tells us that the windows and doors were left open. He comments that the previous tenants were somewhat careless in their housekeeping habits. There's no sense of melancholy here. If he does kindle memories of a past existence, it is simply a matter-of-fact tone, as in the lines, no murmur at the door, so frequent on its hinge before. In fact, he playfully tells the reader to close the doors and windows, lest we see the nakedness of the dark, deserted house. In the fourth stanza, he alludes to the dust to dust, ashes to ashes motif with the words, the house was builded on the earth and shall fall again to ground. His concluding stanza is much the same as the concluding stanza of Tennyson's and Gray's poem, in which the reader is advised to move along with his own affairs, for all is well with those who once occupied these premises. They have moved to better quarters, and our concern should not be with them any longer. Yet, having told us this, Tennyson closes the poem with the word, oh, I wish they could have stayed with us. Right? The line is not intended to be a contradiction to all that had been stated. Yes, the occupants have lived their lives, have run the good race, so to speak, as St. Paul says, and they have gone to their reward. But Tennyson speaks for all of us when he says that they will be sorely missed by the bereaved who must carry on life without them. And we saw that in Frost's poem, Out, where it says, and they, since they were not the one who died, went on with their affairs. All right. The following poem is entitled A House on the Hill. I've already talked about it a little bit, but it's presented here for comparison of theme, but contrast the style. It's called a villanelle, and this is how a villanelle is written. It has 5 3-line stanzas and a final quatrain, it's 4 lines, with the first and third lines of the first stanza repeatedly alternating in the following stanzas. These 2 refrain lines form the final couplet. Now you'll see what I'm talking about here. It's called The House on the Hill. They're all gone away. The house is shut and still. There is nothing more to say. Through broken walls and gray, the winds blow bleak and shrill. They're all gone away. Nor is there one today to speak them good or ill. There's nothing more to say. Why is it then we stray around that sunken sill? They're all gone away. And our poor fancy play for them is wasted skill. There's nothing more to say. There is ruin and decay in the house on the hill. They're all gone away. There is nothing more to say. All right, so this type of poem is called a villanelle, a form of poetry consisting of 19 lines with 2 rhymes written in 5 tercets, 3 lines, and a final quatrain, 4 lines. Of these 2 selections, which poem do you like better? All right, so that would be for a class, if I was teaching a class. So notice this. So this line here, they are all gone away, there's nothing more to say, appears first line, second line, first line, and then second line, and then finally first line, second line. So that's what I'm talking about. But the theme is the same. Edward Arlington Robinson, he was a New England poet. He was adopted by someone from Arlington, Massachusetts, and he adopted that name as his middle name when his father died, his biological father. All right, so that's the end of that.